Um, so welcome to tonight's workshop. We're going to be talking about resumes and cover letters.
Who's that? Can't hear you.
We're going to be talking about resumes and cover letters, which obviously are very important aspects of your career development and preparing for your future careers. And honestly, it's something that is neglected by college students, probably especially like freshmen and young college students, because you guys aren't going to be in your career for years to come. But it is important to learn at this point now the basics of making your resume, like sweating. But it's very important to start getting on this process now and even developing your resume even now at this point, so then you can just update it over the years. And even, while you're in college, there's going to be things that may require a resume. I remember Jade came in last year, or maybe the year before, and what was it, a scholarship or something? She was applying for a scholarship, and it required her to have a resume. So, very important at this stage to start learning at least the basics of making a resume. All right? So we're going to go through the basics of resumes and also cover letters. And then we're also going to talk about interviewing as well, which is a whole nother side to the whole career development piece. How many of you have a resume right now? All right. It's a good amount. Would you say your resume is good at this point? No? Yeah. So yeah, mine is on point. So it's good. I mean, it's good that most of you have resumes, so then maybe you can just update what you already have. Or you may say, you know what, my resume is crap now that I know what a decent one should entail. I need to just trash mine and just start all over. You may realize that. So before we start though, I want to know what questions you guys have about either resumes, cover letters, or interviews. What specific questions do you have before we get started on that?
What should you include on a cover letter?
Okay, we'll be covering that. Just want to get some ideas. I'm not going to answer your questions now, but I want to know what you guys are thinking. Any other questions? Surely you have questions. Kevin?
How long should a resume be?
Okay, good question. We'll go over that. Any others? All right. So I'm going to do something very special for you guys today, which is give you my resume and my cover letter. And it just so happens to be the same resume and cover letter that I used to get this job. So it had to be good enough to get the job. So
No one else applied for it.
But I just want to, not to say that mine is the best, but it's pretty good. Hopefully you'll be able to take something from it. But more specifically, even the cover letter, and then again, I'll be talking about some interview basics as well. So let me pass these out, and then you guys can take a look at this, and then we'll get started. So you can refer to my resume as I'm explaining some of the basics of a good resume. Then you can even see if mine measures up to what I'm saying to you. All right. So let's all right. Can you help me pass this up? Cover it. We'll do that. Here's the cover letters. Let me have one of these. And actually, something else I want to give to you guys, which should bring some relevance to this. I actually printed out the job description for my job. The salary scratched out, of course. I'm going to pass this out to you because the whole relevance of this is to see how well I tied my cover letter and also my resume to what the job was asking for in the job description. I mean, that's a fundamental aspect of it. I mean, you could have the best resume in the world, the best cover letter, but if you haven't presented that your skills and your experience matches what the job is asking for, then you're really not saying much. All right, so I'm gonna pass this on. So I'll take it. As you see, my address is, and phone number is crossed out, but that's where those will go, obviously. I left my email, but that doesn't mean send me unsolicited emails. All right.
Where did they put percent effort? It says percent effort 100.
That's a complex thing that Pitt does. Beth could probably best answer that question. I think she said it right. But basically, I think what that explains is sometimes there'll be, like you may do a certain percentage towards one job, and then you may do a certain percentage of something else that's demanded in your department too. But for me, you know, my job is all I do, so that's 100% effort. That's a basic estimation. You make sure she gets copies too. Were there any extras? All right. All right, so we'll go over this stuff. Just hold on to this, and I'm gonna get started on the actual presentation, and you'll be able to refer to this as I'm going through it. All right. All right, so the four main sections that we'll talk about today are what information should be in a resume, the characteristics of a successful resume, the difference between functional and chronological resumes, and I'm going to also talk about scannable resumes. These are just the sections of resumes, but there'll be, again, we'll talk about cover letters and interviewing as well. So what should be on a resume? What do you guys think should be on a resume? What is like some essential things that should be on your resume?
Work experience.
Yes, that's probably the biggest part of it. Any other things? Look like you.
Sure.
Yeah,
Like involvements in like clubs.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Your education, like how much, like what degrees you got, and kind of
Right.
You have language skills?
Language skills? Yep. Yep. All good answers.
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Your name.
Your name? Kahil.
She spelled it.
All right.
Go ahead.
Your correctly spelled name. So those are just the basics. So we'll get into more things. Basically, you want to identify yourself, obviously, and identifying yourself should include your name, obviously, your address, your phone number, and your email address. Those are all things that identify who you are and ways to contact you. Doesn't make sense to do well in an interview, and they're going to call you for the job, but they don't have your phone number. Like, that's just, you know. Education, obviously, especially as you get into the professional careers and things like that. Most of those jobs will require some kind of educational level. So that's obviously a key part of your resume as well. continuing education. So this will pertain to, you know, if you're furthering your education now. Like say for me, for example, I'm in a graduate program, but I'm not finished yet. But I will put that on my resume and show the date that I will be finished. And that's just to show, you know, that I'm continuing my education. Work experience, professional experience, obviously. Volunteer experience. Does anyone have any volunteer experience? Okay. Activities. So these are, you know, like you were saying, those youth, right? Things that you're doing at Pitt, different clubs, different you know, sports or whatever. Computer skills is a big one because you know, things are moving more, more and more into this technological age, and computer skills is probably like it's a basic skill that you're going to need for most professional jobs. So you definitely want to put your proficiency in computers. Professional associations. These are things like, for example, in my program, there's the Association of Rehabilitation Counselors. It's like a program that professionals join to network and do different things. That's important. Then there's optional sections that you can add on there, like awards and things like that. Objective, I mean, that should definitely be like at the top of your resume. What are you trying to, why are you applying for this job, pretty much. Special skills, abilities, and a reference statement. So simple is, you know, references available upon request. You don't necessarily need to include your references on your resume. You'll give those once the employer asks for your references. And usually that's a good indication that they're going to hire you. So you're going to have your references already thought up. And you also want to contact them and tell them you use them as a reference. No one wants to get an unexpected call and say, you know, Johnny used you as a reference for this job, and the person had no clue that you were even applying for that job. Then they, you know, they may not even be able to give a great reference at that point. All right. So your resume should focus on skills. Skills that's the core of what you're going to do in your job. I mean, your skills are going to be at the center of what you're able to do. So it should focus on your skills. It should use action words. Basically, action words, like if you look at my resume here, words like, you know, recruiting, words like coached, verbs and things that I did. I mean, you want to show that you want to show what you have done. You'll see a lot of that kind of stuff in like business type resumes. People that are going for business jobs. You know, I increased the profit of our company by 4% or something like that. That would be an action verb. Should be easy to read and understand. If you look at mine, you know, I tried to make it as simple as possible. I have my main headings here. The jobs are in bold. The positions are in italics, and the rest is in clear bullets. A lot of times people think it's good to get fancy with your resume and do all type of crazy fonts and cursive wedding letters and stuff. But it's not easy to read. And also there's people that'll have like, you know, sub bullet points and then, you know, all type of arrows and symbols and stuff like that. It just confuses whoever's reading. Basically, the mind frame you want to have is that whoever's reading your resume should be able to just look at it, you know, with ease, and be able to see who you are quickly. Because honestly, they don't really take a lot of time to really like look at your resume in detail, especially when they have 200 applicants. You know, a lot of times they'll just look through the stack, and the ones that are not easy to read, they'll just toss it to the side. And that might be the best applicant. It might be you. But you wouldn't know, you know, they'll never know that because they're not going to interview you because you made their job difficult. All right? So, should be clear and easy to understand. Visually powerful and free of gimmicks. What do you think some gimmicks are that someone would put on a resume?
Clip art?
Clip art, yeah. Yes. Any others? Another example would be like, sometimes people try to put like quotes on their resume. You know, at the bottom, it'll say like, the measure of a man is by his faith, or something like that. Like that's, you're trying to show something that you're like a person of substance or something like that, but really you're just posing a gimmick, which is not gonna help, unfortunately. All right.
James has a question.
Yeah.
What about like scents? A different scent?
Yeah. No one's gonna like smell your resume and say, "Ah, yeah, that smells like the right person." It's just not you'd be surprised that there are different resumes that come, honestly. I used to work, like I started my career off as an employment counselor at the Urban League of Pittsburgh, where basically I had to help people make their resume, and then I had to send their resumes out to different employers to basically try to land them employment. Jobs that I had established relationships with. And I mean, some of the like people would come in with the resume, some would be good, but some would just be like terrible. And I would have to just reconstruct it. I had one guy come in, I mean, he had a handwritten resume on like a tablet sheet of paper. Like, obviously, you know, that's not visually powerful for one, and it's not easy to read if it's your handwriting. One page, that's a question that a lot of people have. I think, Kevin, you might have asked that question. Should be one page. Now, the further you get along in your career, it might be harder to fit everything you've done that's relevant to the job all on one page. So 2 pages at maximum. You don't want to hand in a pamphlet of what you've done to an employee. I mean, no one wants to sit and read your life story when it comes to trying to get a job. And it can get hard. I mean, a lot of times you may have to take some jobs out. You don't need to include, if you're going for a job as a financial analyst, you don't need to include a job working at the pizza shop. I mean, unless you were, you know, in some kind of financial job. If you were just making pizza, that's not really relevant to the job you're applying to. So you don't need to include that on it. I certainly have omitted plenty of jobs that I have done over the years off of this resume. I've done some embarrassing jobs over the years, but you will not find that on my professional resume. All right. So one page. Yeah. So I didn't see.
Would the references that you give them when they ask for them be those jobs you have listed, or could they be anything else? Like, not personal ones, but.
Your references should be someone who you have worked with or worked for, I think, in my opinion.
Right, but it doesn't have to be the jobs that you have listed on your resume, like what if it's.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because basically, when someone's calling your references, say your reference is from the pizza shop that you worked at. There may be different characteristics even about like your character or your work ethic that they can vouch for. You know what I mean? Not necessarily the duties you did, but you know, how you went about doing it. Were you a punctual person? And all those sorts of things. All right, so it doesn't have to be from the job. Jay? Your language, it should be grammatically correct. Definitely do a spell check on your resume. The last thing you want to do is turn in a resume with grammatical errors on it. I mean, that's obvious. That's just like turning in a paper. I mean, you want to do a spell check on it and not have grammatical errors. All right. Formal style, again, I mean, just basic font, basic things. Nothing too fancy or anything like that. All right, you want to write, and another, formal also refers to the way that you're writing. You don't want to write, you know, you don't want to write it as if you're talking. You don't want to write it as if you're texting, obviously, or tweeting or whatever. You want to write it just like you're writing a paper with the same type of grammar. All right. So here are some examples of typos and grammars that have a little bit of irony. So, for example, the second one, proven ability to track down and correct errors. Well, meanwhile, there's an error in your sentence, in the spelling, with errors. The word errors is spelled. I'm a perfectionist, and I rarely ever forget details, but you forgot the D in detail. So, again, self-explanatory stuff.
11 years by high school though?
Yeah, I completed 11 years of high school. It's not quite an accomplishment. So, certainly don't want to do that. All right. Don't use I or me. Again, that's like formal writing. When you write a paper, usually you're not supposed to use I or me. All right. Just want to speak in general terms. All right. Next. All right. You must always be 100% truthful. Now, I spoke a little bit in class today about kind of not exaggerating yourself, but kind of like embellishing, kind of, you looking at your skills and things like that, looking at your transferable skills, all these sorts of things about yourself and really selling yourself. But in selling yourself, just like a salesman, you have to be honest. Like, at the end of the day, they're going to find out if you're not being honest. I know plenty of people who, have put fake jobs on their resume. I worked as the provost at Harvard or something like that. Like, they're going to find that out. They're going to run a background check. They're going to see if you're lying or not. All right. Also, your education. If you don't have a degree, don't say you have a degree, because again, it can run your background. Find out you don't. It'll be very embarrassing if you had been hired by that point, and then they run the check like a month into you working there, and then you have to just get fired because you lied on your resume. Other common lies are how long you've worked at a place. Because when people call your former jobs, that's really all they can tell you. They can tell the person what your title was and how long you worked in that position. They can't say, they were a terrible worker, they were late a lot. That's grounds for them to get sued. All they can tell the person calling your job is when you worked there and what you did. So you definitely don't want to lie about your title. You don't want to lie about how long you worked there, because they're definitely going to find that answer when they call your job. Contains no inappropriate personal information. So pretty much you don't want to get into any personal things. I enjoy anything that's inappropriate. I don't even have to finish the sentence. I'm sure you can imagine a lot of things that would be inappropriate for a resume. Must be produced on a computer. Believe it or not, some people still use typewriters. I've had resumes turned in that had that were done by a typewriter, and again, I've had a resume that was done by hand, and that's not. In this day and age, you have to do it on a computer. Unless it is a functional resume, which we'll discuss in a minute here, it should be presented in chronological order. So again, if you look at my resume, you want to start from most recent you want to start with the most recent, basically. So at the time I applied for this job, I was currently working at the University of Phoenix. Before that, I was at EDMC, and so on and so forth. So it's all in chronological order back to my first professional job. So who's ever heard of a functional resume? Okay, what can you tell us? Well, I'll ask, what can you tell us about a functional resume?
It's more based on like what your like what kind of experience you have or what kind of like traits you have instead of just like going in order of like what jobs you've had. So it's more based on like your character.
Exactly. So it's not a, can anyone think of why you would even use a functional resume? Like who would use a functional resume? Oh, I saw your hand.
For example, if you haven't been working for a few years and you want to get back into employment.
Exactly. So a red flag on someone's resume, if they've done it chronologically, a red flag is if, for example, if you have big time gaps on your resume. Like for example, if mine said, I worked here from 2008 to present, and then my job right before that said 96 to 2001, they're gonna wonder like, what the heck have you been doing? What did you do for 7 years? How did you live? How did you support yourself? Like what did you do? So, and that's a red flag, because that could suggest that you were doing things illegally or doing under the table jobs or something like that. Or it can just suggest that you were just not doing anything. You were lazy. You weren't a hard worker. You were just living off your mom or something. So, for that reason, there are resumes called functional resumes. And basically, on a functional resume, you're not going to find dates. It's more so going to say like your skills. Like for example, a heading might say sales experience, and then you'll talk about the different skills that you developed in sales, or a job where you worked with sales things. But it won't necessarily have a date on it. All right. Now, if they ask for a date, then of course you got to be honest and just tell them. But functional resumes, like he said, they're based on your skills, your competencies. Then, like I said, it may just say like sales experience. It's typically a brief resume. It won't be as long and detailed. It may just be from like here to here or something like that. And that's it. I mean, functional resumes, in a nutshell, are basically just to highlight your skills, not necessarily like the times that you've worked. All right. All right. So in today's market, a lot of times people will utilize sites like Monster.com. Everyone heard of Monster.com? Career Builder. Those are basically job sites. For those of you who don't know, they're job sites that post jobs that you can apply for through their site for different companies. The thing is, a lot of times those sites, it's kind of like when you print it out, depending on like the system, I guess, that they use, when it prints out, different things that you may have used, like my bullet points, for example, they may not show up as bullet points. It may show up as some weird symbol that you didn't intend for it to be. So you want to make sure you don't use certain things that aren't scannable and things like that, or that'll come out funny when using those sites. I say just to keep it basic with the bullet points. I mean, you want to avoid like fancy arrows and asterisks and things like that. Just keep the design simple. And also, when it comes to keywords, a lot of times when employers are using those sites, when the employers that are on those sites are using those sites to try to find applicants, they may just type in a keyword, so they don't have to search every resume. They may just put in like like sales or something like that. Okay, so if your resume has the word sales in it, yours is going to pop up. But if you don't have that on there, then you may go overlooked. So there's certain words, and usually you want to use the words that are in the job description. That's probably a key hint to use in that context. All right. Any questions